So far, almost 200 people have joined us here today, so that's wonderful. I hope you all are ready to really dive in. We're going to have a conversation next with who was going to be our keynote speaker. We went with a little bit different format because it's virtual, and we thought it would be more engaging for you all. So it is my pleasure to have a conversation with Michele Coleman Mayes, Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of the New York Public Library. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Michele, and then we will dive into a conversation. Michele Coleman Mayes is Vice President, GC, and Secretary of the New York Public Library from 2012 to present. She previously held the position of GC for Allstate Insurance, and that was from 2007 to 2012. And Pitney Bowes, 2003, 2007, so not small companies. Ms. Mayes served on the Presidential Commission on Election Administration from 2013 to 2014. I was really pleased to see that. I have my vote necklace on if you all haven't noticed. She was chair of the Commission on Women in the Profession of the American Bar Association, a big deal, from 2014 to 2017. In 2015, she became a fellow of the American College of Governance Council. In 2016, she was elected to the board of directors of GoGo Inc. She's a sought-after speaker on the topics of diversity and inclusion. She is co-author of the book Courageous Counsel, Conversations with Women General Counsel in the Fortune 500. Welcome, Michele. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you quite a bit over this year, and I so appreciate your flexibility. Let's make sure that your microphone is on.
It's on, Mia.
Okay, double checking so I could see you. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you this morning.
So nice to see you. So, Michele, our theme this year is all in reimagining inclusive workplaces, which we're pleased to say we came up with that about 16 months ago. So it may sound like it's a little bit of a bandwagon, but really we came up with it long before some of the things that were happening in our country. But I thought we'd really dive in. How has the workplace changed in your lifetime? And do you feel like we've made some significant progress in terms of diversity?
I would say, in honor of the way the late Justice thought about progress, it's truly been incremental. There have not been vast jumps. You wish it would go much faster, frankly. And I know there is something to be said for being patient, but only so much. But I want to point out the things that I do believe are very concrete, and we've spoken about this. There are far more women and people of color in positions of power. I don't view them as tokens at all. And what really jumped out at me was within the last month, there have been 2 women of color appointed to the general counsel position in Fortune 100 companies. And I'm talking about Google and, of course, my former company, Allstate. And those are significant positions with a lot of influence within those institutions and much broader. I also think it's very clear that most people are searching, they just need to look in the right places and not the same places, for people of that ilk. And so to me, that's absolutely progress. But I also cringe because too often when these individuals are called out, they are qualified as the first, the only, the few. And so not unlike Justice Ginsburg, when we stop counting, then we will have arrived.
Right. We need that moment to come. Tell me about your role as Assistant U.S. Attorney, and then what made you decide to enter the corporate sector?
Curiously, I hadn't thought about going into the government until a friend of the family who was very influential. He was Black and Republican, which is somewhat of an oxymoron even today. And he asked me if I was interested in going to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I thought about it and I went, well, that's a pretty prestigious thing to do. And so I was in between administrations. So I interviewed with the incoming U.S. Attorney. He hadn't been sworn in yet. And as I went in to meet with him, you know, we all have our war stories, you can't help it. He says to me, as we are answering substantive questions, so are you planning on having children? I said, why? Is that a requirement? So he moved on to the next topic. But that would not have been unseemly to ask a woman back in the 70s. Nonetheless, I got the position, and it was one of the best things I did because I went up against some of the most accomplished litigators, both in Brooklyn, because I switched offices, and Detroit. So it was a formative experience.
Great.
But it was time to move on. And I say that because it was a very curious thing that happened. I'd been at the office for a week, not hardly someone with long tenure. And I got on an elevator with one of the AUSAs who was a big dog. I didn't say anything. I kind of cowered in the corner. And he proceeded to get off the elevator before I did. And for whatever reason, he turns around. He hadn't said anything to me. He turns around, points his finger at me and says, "Don't stay too long." And of course, I'm standing there going, okay, I've been here a week.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Did he mean in the elevator? No, he meant in general.
He left.
Wow.
And so I was so taken aback by that advice. And he said it with such conviction. And he said it as much to himself, I think.
Right.
Because he felt he had stayed too long.
Well, you took his cue.
I did.
You didn't stay too long, but you stayed long enough to get some great experience. Can you talk about a time when you were faced with racism in the workplace, how you handled it, what all the parties learned, and did you feel a pressure to be a role model in places where you've worked?
Not in the beginning. I was just trying to find my way. I don't think I could hardly believe myself to be a role model. Although, you know what people typically forget? Someone is always watching them. You just don't know who it is. Mm-hmm. And you really need to be cognizant of that, because while you may think of yourself as not having the big office, the big title, the big bucks, someone is watching you and probably trying to emulate what you're doing, and you're oblivious to it. So keep it in mind. So to answer your question, there are several things. I don't know if at the time some of these events occurred, one of them I did, but one in particular sticks out in my mind. I was at one of my companies, I've been at enough of them, and I was being promoted into a new position. And this was after I had detoured away from the law department. I had gone in to head up HR. Okay. And I was then going back into the law department. So I knew a lot about compensation, shall we say.
Yes. Having
been in HR for that long, because I was in HR for 3 years. So when I got the salary, I went, "You're kidding, right?" And Ruth Bader Ginsburg must have been whispering in my ear, "Don't say things when you're angry," because I got very angry. Mm. And instead, what I did is I said, "Why don't we pick up this discussion another day?"
It's always a good idea.
And I just wanted to signal that I wasn't going to accept the salary. And I don't know if they would have done that if I were a male. You know, when I reflect on it, I just don't believe it. Can I ever prove that? Absolutely not. And who cares, because I got the money I wanted. But there's another one that was very much tied to my race. This was with my first company, and I was being asked to go and negotiate a settlement right outside of Mobile, Alabama. But you had to drive about an hour. So I was going to fly in, meet with the salespeople, and go meet with the attorney and the customer. Former customer is a more apt description. And as I was preparing, I got called into my boss's office. He said, "Well, I got a phone call today." Didn't know what that meant. I'm standing there. He said, "And they're questioning the decision to send you to the South." I said, "Really?" And this is in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I said, "And?" He said, "I informed them that if they wanted a lawyer, it would be you or it would be no one." Now, when I got there's a reason for this, Miel. Yeah. As I'm sitting in the conference room, in the lawyer's office, flanked by two big white guys. And we're just chatting it up. The lawyer rushes in late and he looks at the assembled group. He said, "I thought you were bringing your lawyer."
Hello. Yeah.
He never regained his footing and he didn't get as much money as he wanted either. So.
Good job. Good job. Yeah. It's good to hear talking about, have the conversation the next day, maybe sit on that, sleep on that, take a step back. Those are all good tips, especially with something like right in the moment when it doesn't sit well.
But Michele, I will tell you this, I'm not always composed, calm. But what I do when I know I'm angry is I announce it first.
Okay.
Which says I'm in control of this anger and it is very deliberate.
Fair warning. Yep. I like it. It's a good tactic. Thinking back to when you were a young female lawyer of color and what you needed then from more experienced and senior leaders in your work environments, what should those who are more senior be thinking about and be doing to help newer attorneys? And if anybody has a question for Michele, I'm just going to stop you for 1 sec. Feel free to put some in the chat and we'll try to take some at the end.
I would tell you that the first thing you need to do, and this is always a struggle because people like to see the separation between their work and their personal space and never the twain shall meet. And of course, Zoom has destroyed all that because we see kids running around when people didn't even want to know they had kids. It's the Immaculate Conception, or I don't know where they came from. And now you're in everybody's personal space, even though it's virtual. But I do think you need to get to know your staff. And you can't assume and shouldn't assume that everybody is cookie cutter. And that means you can't just do this cursory, how's it going? I'm talking about a much deeper conversation than that. I also think that you need to respect the differences, that being fair doesn't mean doing everything the same way. And that if this pandemic has unearthed anything, is that you can't treat people all the same. They have different pulls on their time. They have different obligations that they have to attend to. And it requires a not one size fits all. So if there's anything that I would tell folks, it's to not treat people all the same. The other thing that I think is extremely important is figuring out what motivates people. That when you're getting to know them, and everybody is not motivated by the same thing, thank goodness. And so all those are things that I think senior leaders can do, which means you might have to listen more than you talk.
Right. What do you wish you had known as a young lawyer that you now know?
That's a long list. I'll go through some of them. Feel free to stop me anytime you want. Okay. The first one I would say immediately is taking more risk. Being very cautious, wondering if you're going to be able to get a new job. Will you have to move? Will you be successful? Will you give up too much? Will people like you? It's just all these PTSD issues. And so I would tell my younger self not to be so cautious. And related to that, because this is some of the best advice I've gotten, growth and comfort are not compatible. And when people think, I'm good at what I do and everybody respects me and they see me as a subject matter expert, chances are you're not learning nearly as much as you could learn if you decided to stick your neck out more. Failure is not fatal. And that I've always, while I'm not encouraging people to fail once a day, that would be a problem. I am saying that you've learned some of your most important lessons when you know how to deal with failure. I'll tell you a story. I was interviewing a candidate, and now it's a common question. This is many years ago. And I said, tell me about a significant failure. No, I said significant. I don't want to know that you didn't iron your shirt well this morning. Right. I said, tell me about a significant failure and what happened after you experienced it. And there was this long pause as he looked up to the ceiling for divine intervention, I guess. And after he lowered his eyes, he said, I can't think of one right now. And that was a damning answer to that question, because I wanted to hear, this happened, this is what I did, this is what I learned, and this is how I moved forward.
Right. They've taken a risk.
Exactly. So I tell people to learn to be gritty. Justice Ginsburg epitomized that you just, you lean in, you work hard, you persist in the face of obstacles. I think you need to show gratitude. Oh my goodness. We complain so much sometimes that we never stop and step back and say, what do I have to be grateful for?
Right.
And that it's okay to be vulnerable. I'll stop there.
All right, next question. This is a deep one. We had a real race reckoning after George Floyd's death this year. I feel like because our day-to-day pace had slowed down enough during COVID, we were able to really take it in as a nation and not move forward or on to the next news cycle so quickly. Do you feel that our collective level of enough is enough has really shifted? What have you seen in your lifetime that's left you deeply impacted?
So let me start at the end and then work backwards. I have typically, when you look at my bosses, except for one, they've all been men, and they've all been white men. And those white men in particular have shown what it means to be a sponsor and an ally before I knew what those were. And so I think that made a tremendous amount of difference. And there was luck in that, because I didn't know I would end up working for many of them. So there is some luck in your life, even if you think you're brilliant, which I don't. So I have to say that those individuals went to bat for me, many of them. Even the one, for example, who refused to remove me off that case assignment in Alabama. That's an example. Because if you think about it, I would have never known the phone call had been placed. He could have given me some lame excuse. I might have been suspicious, but he didn't have to share that with me. So I think that had an incredible difference in my trajectory. When I think about this righteous unrest, and I really do think it is, it has still caused me to pause, because I've been around the block too many times not to pause, to ask, is this a movement or is it a moment? Mm-hmm. And I'm just not so sold that it will only be a movement. I think it will be both. I think there are people that have had a willful awareness. They have been forced to look at things that are ugly, that are true about themselves, that are true about this society. And it is unpleasant to deal with that. It's much easier to think it's everybody else, but it's not talking about me. I'm one of the good people. And so I do believe that we will do one step back, maybe two step, one step forward. But I think there is concrete change that has taken place, and that there will be changes in laws, maybe starting with voter suppression.
Hope so. Hope so. I hope we've made some inroads there. We had a large voting rights conference last week and talked a lot about it. And it was,
I want to just harken back to something Martin Luther King said, because I would update it. He said we were a 10-day nation. We are now a 10-minute nation. You don't hold people's attention for that long, so it's got to really seep into the pores to stick.
right. Many companies are now openly talking about diversity and a strong culture of inclusion, and some of them due to public pressure, public companies, or public incidents. How do you raise the issue of systemic racism in environments that don't otherwise seem motivated or simply aware of the need to change? What are small ways to have an impact, or at least start a dialogue for people that aren't comfortable or in a position of power yet to have a large impact? How can we get started on things internally in companies and organizations?
I think every culture is slightly different. Once again, you can't have cookie cutters. But one thing you always need to look for, and your antennae should go up, is looking for those allies that have influence and power. And you make a grave mistake if you think you can only confer with people who look like you. It just doesn't work. And so I'm always looking for the individual or the groups of individuals that have similar values to mine that can help me open doors. I don't have to be the one to open the door as long as the door gets open. I think people are too often, looking to take credit. Oh, I did this. Take the I out of it for a minute and just say, did the job get done? And so when I look for allies, I have found them in all of the companies in which I've worked. So I think that's a good way, because you know what an ally can do if it's the right one. Professor Dolly Chuck talks about people who bring the heat and people who bring the light. Allies can bring heat. And you may not be able to, and who cares?
Right.
The other thing that I think all of us could do is educate yourself, encourage people, start saying, there's a report that is coming out in a few weeks from the ABA Commission. It's the last one that I authored, or not authored, but oversaw. And it looks at the relationship between white women and women of color. And the premise behind this is that if you educate yourself, you can then start having worthwhile conversations that will be guaranteed to make you uncomfortable. It's okay.
Yeah, we got to be uncomfortable now, I think. We should be uncomfortable almost every single day. But those are powerful answers. You don't always have to be the one opening the door. Look for allies. Look for allies to do that.
Yep.
How can large corporations increase diversity on their boards? You've worked at Allstate, you're on the board for GoGo. How can we encourage or /force corporations to step up their diversity? We saw a stunning example of that with Alexis Ohanian stepping down from the board at Reddit to ensure his seat was given to a person of color. Mm-hmm. Besides stepping down, what are other?
Yeah, because most board members don't.
Not going to do that. Yes.
It goes back to something that I said earlier. Most board searches are not done through search firms. They're done through networking. And so if you're going to, why do you wonder that you only catch trout if that's all that swims in that stream? It's like, what did you expect to catch? Salmon? And so my comment there is, stop going to the same places you've always gone. Expand your network, expand your circle of friends, signal to organizations that you know have access to different networks to feed your network. That's how you do this. And don't make assumptions. This is the other assumption. If you haven't been a CEO, surely you don't have as much to offer. Well, actually, that's far from the truth. And I think lawyers, because this has always been a struggle, people will never say, I have one CEO, why do I need another CEO on the board? You've never heard that excuse. Yet, when it comes to lawyers, they will say, well, there is a general counsel for the company, so why do we need another lawyer on the board? Because what the lawyer is bringing isn't necessarily having to do anything with the law, but all the other things that we do so well, such as risk assessment, dealing with regulatory schemes and government affairs and all the things that have to do with the reputational risk to the company. That has nothing to do with the fact that you went to law school, as much as it is how your brain gets wired.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about your work for the ABA? You were chair of the Commission on Women in the Profession for 3 years. Did you see real change in that time, and what were your top priorities? I know you've mentioned that the number of women equity partners remains somewhat stagnant at about 15%, and that you believe it has to be implicit bias. Can you talk about how to overcome the implicit bias, and just tell us a little bit about your time at the top role on women's gender equity in the ABA?
Yeah, and I've been involved with the commission off and on since 1992, long time. And as a practical matter, I think the more we learn about bias, the more we appreciate how it controls us. Because, it's like an invisible hand. But to say, therefore, there's nothing I can do about it, as my friend would say, stop admiring the problem. It is true that it's the muscle that does the most work is our unconscious mind. So then how do you interrupt it? And to come back to your question about my work at the ABA, one of the things I decided to put my shoulder to the wheel on was grappling with what I call systemic bias. I mean, it's in the DNA of organizations, of institutions, of government. And the premise behind it was not, again, to so much unearth it because it's out there. We did that as well because we did a survey. But then to move to the next step, which was to look at talent management systems, hiring, promotion, compensation, all those systems, and say, how do you interrupt it? Because bias is built into it. And so what we challenge organizations to do is first to figure out how bias is showing up. It doesn't show up the same way every place. I go back to what I said earlier, cultures are different. So do your homework. Figure out what's driving things in your organization that you can't necessarily see, which is the name of the report. You can't change what you can't see. Now I want you to see it. One of the law firms that ended up delving into the study, the person who was head of diversity said they looked at the survey and they saw all the different stats and percentages, and they said, well, that's not us. So they did a survey, which is a good way to start. Mm-hmm. And as I said to them when they got the results, now you can see your ugly baby. Deal with it.
Yes, it's right there. In writing, in statistics, yeah.
What has been a little disheartening, Mio, is the study came out 2 years ago. I think it's a 2 or 3, I've lost track of time. It might be 3 now. And what you have seen is that the toolkits that a company, which is a methodology that Commission uses a lot, is to do toolkits that are turnkey.
Right.
You could do the information, now look at the toolkits here. Is that what someone found when they went back and asked a survey about what have you done differently since the study came out and you employed some of the techniques? And what was determined, I guess it shouldn't be a surprise, but you go, duh, is that those recommended actions that infringe on discretion more are least likely to be done.
Okay. Makes sense in a way.
It does.
How do you define success? And do you think it's different for everyone?
I go back to when you asked me, how do you get, how do you motivate your staff? And I said to figure out what motivates them, because what motivates one individual may be a total turnoff for somebody else. And so I think success is very much driven by your value system, and everybody doesn't have the same ones. And so what is it about this individual that makes this individual tick, makes that person authentic, and how do I tap into it? So I don't think it's one answer for everyone.
You mentioned you have 35 years of experience as an in-house counsel, and that role now requires much more experience. You used to state, it used to be if you couldn't practice real law, in quotes, you became an in-house counsel, and that is no longer factual. Talk about the role of an in-house counsel and how that's changed a little bit.
It's changed dramatically. I actually struggled, as you just pointed out, to go in-house because I thought, God, I'm not going to be practicing law. What the heck is this? My then husband worked for General Motors, and he looked at me and said, are you kidding? And I went, because I didn't know any in-house counsel well at all. I said, no, real lawyers don't go work at some stupid company. He said, I think you need to revisit. Here you go, don't assume you know everything, right? I said, okay, let me look into it. And the more I dug into it, I went, wow, this could be a promising next step. So I took the leap, very uncomfortable, because remember, I'd been in the courtroom for years, for 5 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I tried cases. And you want me to go write a memo and go to a meeting? It was a bit of a tough transition. But what I have discovered over the many decades that I have been in-house is that in-house counsel have really become integral parts of the C-suite. They are in, and they're not there to serve coffee. They are there to speak up, to have points of view on a range of issues having nothing to do with the law. They're consigliere to the CEO, to the board. So their influence is now catching up with their weight. They've always carried a lot of weight, but now their influence is much more obvious. For that reason, now that we're going, and firms are not necessarily as easy a culture to exist in for women, maybe even for anybody who inhales oxygen, because it's very much tied to how much money did you bring in? What are your billable hours? I don't think that metric should be the only one, but it's the one we've decided to live by and die by for now. And so many women found in-house positions more hospitable. I found it, it could be grueling. I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't that lucky because the jobs are very meaty. And I think outside counsel are now much more likely to consider that as a next move. Even partners, many partners have come in-house.
Right.
I'll tell you an interesting story on that though. Some search firms don't want partners that have not done an in-house job before because they don't bring quite the sensitivities, shall I say,
Yes.
anymore.
It's a good story. So I grew up a library lover, big reader. I told you on my podcast that I had recently read The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which I recommend to everyone. It was fantastic. I'm picturing you in like these hidden suites in the New York Public Library with this gorgeous view of gardens and maybe old books on your right and left. Tell me how far off I am from what your current role is at the New York Public Library.
Well, if you start with my office, I've gone backwards. I don't have a window. Now, as a young lawyer, that would have been a sign that I hadn't arrived yet. I could care less. I had a window. It's an inside court now, so I look at somebody's desk.
Okay.
But leaving that aside, which is truly not important, it was just tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
That's an incredible institution. And I always had an affinity for libraries growing up in Detroit because that's where you went. Your parents never worried about you if you were going to the library. Okay, bye, see you later. And you come back with all your books and you would be very smug because you would have read them, wanted to talk about them. But now I'm seeing libraries in a much more expansive way because we can bridge so many differences. And we as a country, probably as a world, have become polarized. And yet when you come into the library, we don't care who you are. You don't have to have a title. You need not have wealth. You just have to have the ability to read. And even if you can't do that, we will help you.
You could learn, right?
So it really is egalitarian, and that's extremely important. There are very few places in this country where all types of people can mingle and be as different as night is from day.
I just wanted to hear a little bit about your day-to-day and what I was imagining your life was like. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we're going to take a couple questions from our chat. I may ask Amy or Sunu to unmute so that they can help me offer questions to you. If you had a mission statement for your legal career, what would it be?
It's interesting. It wouldn't have been this at the beginning, but I will tell you it is what it is now. That as I rose, I sent the elevator back down, equipped with what it needed so that you could make it your own space.
Wow, that's powerful. Well, I've loved speaking to you. I am very appreciative that you shared your time with us.
Thanks, Lee.
We're going to take a question or two from our chat. Amy, could you unmute and read off one or two that you think would be?
I thought, yeah, Sunu, Sunu had a really good one about seeking examples about, maybe Sunu, you could ask it about when, I mean, Michele, you're amazing. This has been incredible.
There's one.
Go, Sunu.
from the crowd. I think it's from, let's see. I want to make sure that I get her name. Angelica Jordan asked, how did you know that you are walking in your purpose? What signals let you know in your experience thus far that confirmed that you're where you needed to be? And then I had many, many questions, but I thought we should give others.
You had to ask me the hardest one. Didn't you?
Walking in your purpose.
Yeah. I guess I'll tell you this, and I think everybody's got to have their North Star. And I've been in places where I felt my values could be lived and not just be mouthed. And so that's the first thing, that I was around people that were ethical, that allowed me to experiment, to grow, to be challenged. When I'm not challenged, I'm not happy. You know, if I'm just kind of coasting. So whether that was my purpose or not, hard to say, but I've been allowed to be myself and to help others, which goes back to the mission statement that I just gave Michele. And so I didn't feel like my wings were being clipped. So I was willing to give whatever I had to the places where I was, but I was also willing to move on to do something new. So I don't know, in some ways you can say maybe I'm a little restless, but I'm always looking for a challenge. And so if I'm comfortable where I am to the extent that I can have a challenge, maybe fail, keep growing, keep moving forward and help, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm okay.
Well,
Someone has sent a question privately to me, so I'm not going to say her name, but this question really resonates for me too. And I know others have said this. Have you ever decided to pause your career or decided to not move forward, with an opportunity to take care of family or other personal obligations? If so, how did you make peace with this? In this moment of caregiving and closed schools, I
Yeah.
think many of us are grappling with that.
And so I'm not going to fake the answer to that question because I don't have children. I didn't remain married. And so and I never really had to make sacrifices tied to my family, which is what I think that question is imbued with. So it wouldn't be fair of me. I know many people who have, because I have counseled them. And let me tell you how I think they have come to grapple with it and be at peace with it. They have figured out what's important when. I don't know how else to answer it, Sanu. Everything is not equal. And the fact that you have to make those choices because you're now an adult, yep, that's what you got to do. What's most important now?
We have time for one more, Michele?
say one more. We can do one more if Michele can.
I'm fine.
Privilege. A lot of us sort of chimed in when you said something about announcing your anger. That seems like a very sort of powerful phrase that I know I haven't heard before. Do you mind just sharing an example of it or sort of how you go about doing that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you the why, because think about it a minute. We get the meme of being angry Black women, right? Oh, here you go. They're just going off the rails. And I think anger has a purpose, which is to show how much you are passionate about something or how wrong you are by what somebody did versus what their intent was. I'm not really interested in your intent. I want to tell you about the impact on me. So coming back, it isn't magical, but I typically will say this. A group of folks on my staff did something really dumb. I don't remember what it was right now. First of all, I never yell. That's unacceptable. But what I said to them when we were assembled, I said, I am unhappy about this and I'm angry about it. And I'm going to explain to you why. And I simply went through my rationale. So it's not anything, there's no drum roll. It's just very matter of fact, which again goes back to say, I'm not out of control. I'm not overly emotional. I'm being very factual. And that's what But it allows you to say, you're going to listen to it, and I have a right to have this emotion.
I like that.
That's it.
I'm gonna start announcing my anger. It'll start happening. I am angry. I like that you're not a yeller though. Well, Michele, you have been such a delight. We feel privileged to spend time with you today and to learn from you and to kind of grasp some of the things that you've achieved in your career and what you've experienced and how maybe we might handle them, how to come together and find sponsors and allies to help us in our careers, to maybe not be afraid, take a risk now and then, make a leap, do something that makes you a little uncomfortable. It's been just wonderful to get to know you. We've had many conversations over the last year. I feel as though we're friends now. You may not think so, but I think we are. So I'm calling you my new friend. So pleased to have you with us at the 12th Annual Women in the Law Conference. We hope to see you in person in May, and we will continue to be in touch about that. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for creating this community.